The palace of the Thalorian queen was always quiet at night. Tall crystal walls shone under the silver glow of twin moons, and the long corridors echoed with the soft footsteps of guards. Among them walked Ethan Ward, a young human soldier assigned to protect the royal chambers. He was only one of a few humans serving in the Thalorian Empire, and sometimes he felt like an outsider. Still, he carried his duty with respect, his eyes sharp, his steps steady. The queen, Aurelia, was admired by all. To her people, she was more than a ruler. She was the heart of the empire, a symbol of wisdom and strength. Her tall frame, shining skin, and calm voice filled every room with quiet authority. Ethan had seen many leaders before, but none like her. She never raised her tone, yet everyone listened. She never rushed, yet everything was done in order. That evening, the queen was meeting her council inside the Hall of Stars, a vast chamber with a glass ceiling that revealed the night sky. Ethan stood near the tall doors, keeping his usual silent watch. He was not supposed to focus on the discussions, but his ears caught fragments of the meeting. The nobles spoke about trade routes, border disputes, and the future of colonies. Aurelia listened with patience, her golden eyes calm as she considered every word. Suddenly, something changed. Ethan's eyes caught a small detail. The queen's hand, usually steady, trembled slightly as she reached for a document. At first, he thought it was nothing. But then she paused in the middle of her sentence. Her posture shifted, her shoulders lowered, and her breath grew uneven. The council members did not notice. They believed she was thinking, weighing her words as always. But Ethan saw more. He noticed how her lips lost a little color. He noticed how her chest rose and fell too quickly. Then, without warning, her tall figure wavered and collapsed to the side of her throne. Gasps filled the hall. Several nobles froze, unsure of what they had seen. Others whispered in shock, unable to believe that their queen could fall. To them, Aurelia was unshakable. Weakness was not something they could accept. Ethan did not stop to think. His body moved before his mind. He rushed forward, his boots echoing against the crystal floor, and reached the queen's side. She lay against the arm of her throne, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. "Your Majesty," Ethan said firmly, trying not to sound alarmed. He checked her pulse the way he had been trained in his basic medical lessons back on Earth. It was faint, but it was there. The council stood around them, stunned and silent. One of the Thalorian advisors finally spoke, his voice trembling. "She must be resting. The queen cannot be ill." But Ethan shook his head. "This is no rest. She needs help now." The alien attendants hesitated. Their culture told them that their queen was beyond human frailty. They believed her body was too advanced, too strong to fail in such a way. They could not accept that she had collapsed from something as simple and mortal as a failing heart. Ethan, however, recognized the signs. He had seen them once before on Earth, when a fellow soldier had collapsed during training. It was the same shallow breathing, the same sudden weakness. His instincts told him what to do. He carefully supported Aurelia, keeping her head lifted, making sure her airway was clear. The nobles whispered among themselves, their voices full of doubt. "What is he doing? Why does the human touch her?" But Ethan did not listen. He pressed his ear close enough to hear her breath. He checked her pulse again. His training was simple, not advanced like alien medicine, but it was enough to guide him. Minutes passed slowly, yet to Ethan, they felt like hours. He kept her steady, whispering calm words, though he was unsure if she could hear. Slowly, her breathing began to even out. The pale color in her lips softened. The faint rise and fall of her chest grew steadier. When her eyes fluttered open for just a second, Ethan felt relief. She was not gone. She was fighting, though weakly. The council members finally moved, calling for the royal healers, but Ethan knew his quick actions had bought her precious time. As he sat there, supporting the queen, he realized something. In a hall filled with the most powerful figures of the empire, he was the only one who had acted. Not because he was braver, not because he was wiser, but because he saw her not as a symbol, not as a perfect figure, but as a living being in need of help. And at that moment, Ethan Ward, the human guard, became the silent witness to a truth no one else wanted to see: the queen was not unbreakable. The Hall of Stars had grown silent after the queen collapsed. The nobles, dressed in their shining robes, stood frozen. They whispered to one another in disbelief, yet none of them moved forward. The queen was their symbol of strength, and to see her lying weak in the arms of a human was something they did not know how to accept. Ethan stayed by her side, keeping his hand steady on her pulse. It was still faint, but there. His heart raced, but his voice stayed calm. He remembered the training he once had on Earth, the lessons given to every soldier. They were told how to act in an emergency, how to give first aid until proper help arrived. It was not advanced medicine, but it was built on instinct, on fast decisions, and on the will to keep someone alive. The queen's breathing grew uneven again. Ethan gently adjusted her position, making sure her head was lifted just enough for her chest to rise more freely. The Thalorian attendants gasped, unsure if they should stop him. One of them stepped closer, his silver skin reflecting the light of the hall. "You are not permitted to touch her," the attendant said, his voice sharp but uncertain. Ethan did not look up. "If I don't, she will stop breathing." The words struck the hall like a bell. No one answered. The council members looked at each other, their proud faces filled with confusion. They had healers, they had advanced machines, but none were here in the hall at this moment. Only Ethan acted, and only Ethan seemed to know what to do. He remembered the soldier who had once fallen in front of him during training years ago. That man had collapsed from exhaustion, and Ethan had followed the simple steps taught in class: check breathing, check pulse, keep the airway open. Those steps had saved a life once before, and now they guided him again, even in this alien palace. Minutes felt heavy. Aurelia's eyelids moved faintly, but she did not fully wake. Her breathing softened, still weak, but no longer breaking apart. Ethan pressed two fingers lightly against her wrist, feeling the slow rhythm. It was not strong, yet it was there. "She is stabilizing," he said, though he was speaking more to himself than anyone else. The council finally broke from their shock. Some rushed to call the royal healers. Others argued in hushed voices. "This cannot be spoken of," one whispered. "If the people know, they will lose faith." Ethan ignored them. His focus was only on the queen. For the first time since he had arrived in the empire, he did not feel like an outsider. He felt like the only one who could truly see her not as an untouchable ruler, but as a living being in danger. When the healers finally arrived, carrying shining cases of tools, they seemed surprised to see her still alive. They moved quickly, surrounding her, scanning her body with thin beams of light. But before they lifted her away, one healer glanced at Ethan and spoke in a low tone. "You gave her time. Without it, we might have arrived too late." Ethan only nodded. He did not need thanks. He only needed to know she was safe. The queen was carefully lifted and carried to her private chamber. The nobles followed, whispering again, still unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Ethan with distrust, others with quiet respect. He was left standing alone at the edge of the hall, his hands still trembling though he tried to hide it. Later that night, as the moons shone through the palace windows, Ethan was called into a smaller chamber. A group of advisors sat around a long table, their eyes sharp. "You acted without permission," one of them said. "It is not the place of a human guard to touch our queen." Ethan stood tall, though his voice stayed calm. "I acted because she needed help. If I had waited, she might not be alive." The advisors fell silent. They could not deny the truth, yet their pride held them back from admitting it openly. After a long pause, one of them spoke. "This matter must not leave the palace walls. The empire must never hear that their queen collapsed." Ethan only bowed his head slightly. "My loyalty is to her safety. Nothing more." The meeting ended with no clear answer. Ethan returned to his post, his thoughts heavy. He wondered if he had done enough. He wondered if a simple human's instincts could truly protect someone so important, someone who carried the weight of worlds. But deep inside, he felt certain of one thing: when no one else had acted, he had. And that, for now, had made all the difference. The queen's chambers were silent except for the faint hum of the healing devices. Soft blue lights pulsed around her bed, monitoring her condition, while the royal healers moved with careful steps. Ethan stood near the doorway, uncertain if he was meant to remain. Yet no one asked him to leave. Perhaps even the proud Thalorians understood that he had been the first to act when others hesitated. Aurelia lay still, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with effort. She looked less like the powerful queen who ruled over star systems and more like a tired traveler who had walked too far. Ethan found it difficult to look at her in this weakened state. He had always seen her as something beyond ordinary life, but now he saw her as someone who could be hurt, someone who could be lost. The advisors whispered in the corner of the chamber. Their voices were low but sharp. "This must not reach the ears of the people," one said. "If the colonies learn that she collapsed, there will be unrest," another added. They argued over what story should be told, but none of them mentioned what mattered most: that the queen was ill and needed care. Ethan kept his silence, his eyes on Aurelia. He thought about how strange it was that so many around her cared more for her image than for her life. He was only a guard, one among many, yet he could not look at her without seeing the truth. Hours passed. The healers worked, but even they seemed cautious. They used advanced machines, but they avoided certain words, as if speaking them aloud would make the truth too real. Ethan recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look he had seen in soldiers who refused to admit their wounds. Pride was strong, but pride did not heal. Late into the night, the chamber grew quiet. Most of the advisors left, their robes trailing behind them as they whispered about keeping appearances. Only two healers remained, watching over the queen. Ethan was told to stand guard inside, close to her. It felt unusual, but he obeyed without question. As the hours stretched on, Ethan found himself studying her breathing. Sometimes it steadied, sometimes it faltered. He listened to the hum of the machines, to the faint rhythm of her heart as the devices echoed it. He wondered if his simple actions earlier had truly made a difference, or if fate had simply given her more time. Then, as the moons outside shifted higher, something happened. Aurelia stirred. Her eyelids moved slowly, heavy with effort, until they opened just a little. Her golden eyes, usually bright and commanding, were faint but focused. They moved across the room until they found Ethan. For a moment, he thought she would speak to the healers. But instead, her lips moved weakly, and she whispered one word. Ethan. The sound was soft, barely more than a breath, yet it struck him like thunder. He froze, unsure if he had imagined it. But the way her eyes stayed on him told him it was real. Yes, Your Majesty, he said quietly, leaning closer so she could hear. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say more, but the strength left her, and her eyes closed again. Still, that single word repeated in Ethan's mind. She had remembered his name. Out of all the people in the chamber, it was him she had called to. The healers had not noticed, or perhaps they chose not to acknowledge it. They continued watching the monitors, recording her slow progress. But for Ethan, the moment was different. It felt like a thread had been tied between them, invisible yet unbreakable. As dawn's light began to touch the palace walls, Ethan remained by her side. He thought about what the future would hold. The empire would continue to see her as unshakable, as a queen who could never fall. But he knew the truth now. Behind the crown and the throne was someone who carried a secret, a fragile heart that could falter like any other. And though he did not yet understand why, Ethan felt certain that he would be part of that secret. The queen had whispered his name not by mistake, but by choice. In the stillness of the chamber, as the machines kept their steady hum, Ethan realized his duty had changed. He was no longer only a guard of her palace walls. He had become a guard of her hidden weakness, the one truth that could never be spoken aloud. And so, as the new day began, Ethan promised himself quietly that he would protect not just her life, but her secret too. The palace slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but inside the queen's private chamber, silence still ruled. For days, the nobles spread careful words across the empire. They told the people their queen was in deep meditation, seeking wisdom for the future. No one beyond the palace walls was allowed to know the truth that Aurelia had fallen in front of her council and now lay in recovery. Ethan continued his duty at her side. At first, he was told it was temporary, but as the hours stretched into days, no one replaced him. Perhaps the advisors trusted him more than they admitted. Or perhaps they feared removing the one person the queen had whispered to. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the healing devices. Ethan often sat in silence, listening to her steady but fragile breathing. He wondered if she remembered calling his name or if it had been a moment of weakness she would never mention again. One evening, as the moons rose outside the tall windows, Aurelia stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, their golden light faint but clear. She turned her head slightly toward Ethan, and for the first time since her collapse, her voice filled the chamber. "You stayed," she said softly. Ethan rose to his feet. "Of course, Your Majesty. I was ordered to guard your chamber." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it was filled with weariness. "And if you had not been ordered?" Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly. "I would have stayed anyway." Aurelia studied him quietly, as though searching for something in his expression. "You saw me fall," she whispered. "You saw what no one else must see." Ethan lowered his gaze, respectful. "Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice grew even softer, almost like a secret. "You must not tell anyone. Not the nobles, not the soldiers, not even your own kind. If they know that my body weakens, they will lose their trust. The empire is built on belief, and belief is a fragile stone. One crack, and it will break." Ethan understood. He had seen leaders fall before, not from wounds but from doubt. Still, he struggled with the weight of her words. "But your Majesty," he said carefully, "you need rest and care. If you hide too much, it may grow worse." Her golden eyes softened. "That is why I ask you. You acted when others froze. You saw me not as a symbol but as a life that could slip away. You are not blinded by our pride. That is why I need you here." Ethan felt the weight of her trust settle on his shoulders. He was only a guard, trained to stand silent at doors and watch corridors. Yet now the Queen herself asked him to carry a secret larger than his duty. "I am not a healer," Ethan said quietly. "No," Aurelia replied, "but you have something greater. You have instinct. It was your instinct that gave me time when even my healers had not yet arrived. I do not ask you to cure me. I ask you to watch over me, to remind me when my pride blinds me. Promise me this." The request felt heavier than any order Ethan had received before. He thought about the Empire, about the millions who looked to her as their unshakable guide. He thought about the chamber that had fallen silent when she collapsed, about the fear on the faces of the nobles. If the Empire ever knew the truth, everything could change. Finally, he bowed his head. "I promise, Your Majesty." Aurelia closed her eyes for a moment, as though comforted by his words. When she opened them again, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman carrying a burden too long hidden. "Then you are no longer just my guard. You are my keeper of truth. And for that, Ethan Ward, you have my trust." The chamber fell quiet again, but the air between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of a guard standing watch. It was the silence of two beings, one alien, one human, sharing a secret that could never be spoken aloud. As night deepened, Ethan sat once more by her side. He watched her breathing grow steadier, and though the weight of her request pressed on him, he felt a strange calm. For the first time, he was not only guarding her life. He was guarding her trust, her secret, and perhaps even the future of the Empire itself. The days passed slowly in the palace. From the outside, nothing seemed different. The nobles told the Empire that their queen was deep in meditation, seeking wisdom for the future. But inside the palace walls, whispers grew stronger. The queen's absence from public view had stretched too long, and suspicion began to spread. Ethan remained in her chamber as ordered, standing watch while the healers moved quietly around her. Aurelia was recovering, but her strength returned slowly. At times, she would sit up and speak softly with Ethan, asking him about human customs, about the way his people lived. These quiet talks made him forget for a moment that she was a queen. She seemed curious, almost gentle, though still burdened by her hidden weakness. But not everyone saw Ethan's presence in the same way. The nobles began to notice how much time he spent in the queen's private chambers. They whispered in the halls, their voices sharp and doubtful. "Why is the human still allowed so close to her?" one said. "He acts as if he has a role greater than his station," another replied. Their suspicion grew each day. Some believed Ethan was there to influence her, to carry human interests into the heart of the Empire. Others thought he was a distraction, a sign of weakness in the Queen's judgment. Ethan felt the weight of their stares whenever he walked through the corridors. He was used to being different among the Thalorians, but now the difference felt dangerous. Still, he kept to his duty, remembering Aurelia's request. He had promised to guard her secret, and that promise mattered more than the whispers of nobles. One evening, Aurelia asked to sit in the small garden connected to her chamber. The night air was cool, and the soft glow of flowers lit the path. Ethan walked beside her, ready to steady her if she faltered. She leaned lightly on her armrest but kept her head high. "They watch you," she said after a pause. Her golden eyes looked ahead, calm but knowing. Ethan nodded. "They think I should not be near you. They fear what they do not understand," Aurelia said. "You act differently than they expect. You are not bound by our pride. That makes you valuable to me but suspicious to them." Ethan looked at her carefully. "Does it trouble you, Your Majesty?" Aurelia shook her head slowly. "No. Let them whisper. Let them doubt. What matters is that you have given me time. Without it, I would not be here to hear their doubts at all." Her words gave him strength, though the tension in the palace still pressed heavily. The healers, curious about Ethan's methods, sometimes asked him to explain. They had seen him guide the queen through slow breathing exercises, small stretches, and simple routines from human training. At first, they dismissed these actions as unnecessary. But when Aurelia's color returned more quickly, they began to watch with interest. "These are not advanced techniques," one healer said quietly. "Yet they work in ways our machines cannot." Ethan only shrugged. "Sometimes simple things matter most." The healers began to quietly include his suggestions. A different kind of respect grew between them, though they never said it aloud in front of the nobles. Meanwhile, the queen grew stronger, little by little. Her voice carried more steadiness, and her steps no longer wavered as much. Still, she was not ready to return fully to her throne. The empire expected her to rise soon, and time was running short. The whispers outside her chamber grew louder. Some nobles pressed for answers, others hinted at replacing her leadership if she could not return. Ethan heard these voices in the corridors, and he knew the day would come when the queen would have to face them. But in her garden, away from the heavy eyes of the court, Aurelia spoke with him not as a ruler but as someone who trusted him. "You have given me more than time," she said softly. "You have given me courage to face them again. And when I do, I will not stand alone." Ethan bowed his head. He had never imagined that his simple instincts, his simple human methods, could mean so much to someone who ruled over stars. Yet in her voice, he heard the truth. He had become part of her strength. The palace might whisper. The nobles might doubt. But Ethan knew his promise was unbroken. He would stand by her, no matter what trial waited ahead. The palace was filled with quiet tension. Days had turned into weeks, and still the queen had not shown herself to the wider empire. The nobles grew restless. They wanted proof that Aurelia was strong enough to lead, or else they would begin to question her throne. Whispers reached every corner of the palace. Some nobles spoke of loyalty, others of doubt. The council finally decided that Aurelia must attend a special gathering. It would not be public, but it would be a test. If she appeared strong before the council, the empire would remain calm. If she faltered, the whispers would grow into storms. In her chamber, Aurelia prepared in silence. Her golden robes were laid out, shimmering with light. She looked at them with steady eyes, though Ethan could see the weight pressing on her shoulders. "They will watch me closely," she said quietly. "Not my words, not my wisdom. Only my strength. If I stumble, they will not forgive it." Ethan stood near her, his voice calm but firm. "Then let us face it together. You are stronger now than the day you collapsed. You only need to remember how to steady yourself when the strain comes." She gave a faint smile. "You speak as if you have done this before." "In my world," Ethan said, "soldiers are often tested to their limit. Sometimes it is not about strength of body but strength of breath, of focus, of staying calm when everyone is watching. Aurelia listened, and for a moment her expression softened. Then I will trust your human ways once again. The night before the gathering, Ethan guided her through the same simple routines they had practiced. He showed her how to breathe slowly, how to stand with balance, how to shift her weight when her body felt weak. She followed every step carefully, her dignity never lost, even in small movements. When the day arrived, the council gathered in the Hall of Stars. The great crystal ceiling shone with sunlight, casting long beams across the polished floor. Rows of nobles stood silent, their eyes sharp and expectant. The tall doors opened, and Aurelia entered. She walked with steady steps, her golden robe trailing behind her. Ethan followed a few paces behind, his eyes scanning the hall, but his focus was on her. Every movement mattered. Every breath counted. The nobles bowed, but when they rose, their eyes searched her face, her posture, her hands. They wanted to see weakness, to measure her strength with their own judgment. Aurelia lifted her head high. "My counsel," she said in her calm, commanding voice. "I stand before you, as I always have, to guide this empire." Her words carried, yet Ethan saw the small tremor in her hand as she gripped the arm of her throne. He recognized the moment of strain. Quietly, from behind her, he raised his hand slightly, a signal they had practiced. She saw it. She breathed in slowly, just as he had taught her, letting the air steady her body. Her hand relaxed, and her voice grew even stronger. The council listened, their doubt slowly softening into uneasy respect. She spoke of the future, of unity, of wisdom gained in her time away. No one could see how close she had been to faltering. No one knew that Ethan's simple human signal had steadied her when she needed it most. When the meeting ended, the nobles bowed once again. Some still doubted, but none could openly challenge her now. She had stood before them, strong and steady, and that was enough. As the hall emptied, Aurelia remained seated, her breathing a little heavy but controlled. Ethan stepped closer. "You did it," he said softly. She looked at him, her golden eyes calm but filled with quiet gratitude. "No," she said. "We did it." In that moment, Ethan realized something. He was no longer only her guard or her secret keeper. He had become part of her strength, hidden but vital. Without him, she might have stumbled. With him, she had faced her council and held her throne. The empire still believed their queen was unshakable. Only Ethan knew the truth that behind her steady voice and calm gaze, there was a heart that had almost failed. And only he knew that their strength was now shared. White heavy check mark word count, 704. Would you like me to move to the final part 7, 700 words, where Aurelia openly honors Ethan and their bond becomes a symbol of trust between humans and Thalorians. The test in the Hall of Stars had ended, but its echo lingered through the palace. The nobles had bowed to their queen, and though some still carried doubts in their hearts, they could no longer deny what they had seen. Aurelia had stood tall, her voice steady, her presence unbroken. The empire would believe in her strength once more. Ethan followed her back to her private chamber. For the first time in weeks, she walked without leaning on her attendants. Her steps were slower than before, but they were steady. The golden robe trailed behind her like a river of light. Inside the chamber, the healers checked her once again. When they left, Aurelia turned toward Ethan. "You have given me more than time," she said. "You have given me my throne again." Ethan shook his head. "It was your strength, your majesty. I only reminded you to use it. Her eyes softened. Strength is not only of the body. Sometimes it is knowing who to trust. And I trusted you. Her words stayed with him as the days passed. The palace grew calmer. The whispers of doubt faded, replaced by stories of the queen's wisdom during her time of meditation. The empire believed she had returned stronger than before, never knowing how close they had come to losing her. But inside the palace, change was quietly taking place. Aurelia began inviting Ethan not only as her guard but also as her companion in private meetings. He stood by her side during small councils, silent yet watchful. The nobles noticed, and though some frowned, none dared speak against her decision. One evening, Aurelia called for a gathering in the Hall of Stars. This time, it was not a secret trial but an open meeting with her closest advisors. Ethan stood at the edge of the hall, expecting his usual silent role. But as the queen rose from her throne, her voice carried across the chamber with unusual warmth. Before we speak of matters of state, Aurelia began, there is someone I must honor. The hall grew still. Nobles exchanged curious glances. No one knew what the queen intended. She turned her gaze toward Ethan. When I faltered, when even my own counsel froze, it was not our advanced knowledge that saved me. It was the instinct of one who is not of our kind. Ethan Ward, a human guard, saw what others could not and acted when no one else would. Ethan froze where he stood, his heart pounding. The nobles whispered in disbelief, their eyes sharp with shock. Aurelia continued, her voice calm but firm. It is easy to believe strength means perfection. But true strength is not in never falling. It is in rising again, with the help of those we trust. Ethan Ward reminded me of this truth. From this day forward, he shall not be seen only as a guard, but as my protector and companion, trusted above all. The hall erupted with murmurs. Some nobles looked uneasy, others simply bowed, unable to argue with their queen. Ethan stepped forward slowly, unsure if he should speak. He stopped at the base of her throne and bowed deeply. Your Majesty, he said quietly, I only did what anyone should have done. Aurelia looked at him with a faint smile. Perhaps. But you were the only one who did. Her words silenced the hall more strongly than any command. From that day, Ethan's place in the palace changed. He was still a guard, but no longer just another face among the watch. He became a living reminder of trust between two worlds. Some nobles still doubted, but many began to respect him, even if quietly. For Ethan, the honor was heavy but humbling. He never sought titles or recognition. All he had wanted was to protect the life that had once faltered before him. Now, he realized he had become part of something larger, a bond that stretched beyond human and Thalorian differences. Late one night, as the palace lights dimmed and silence covered the halls, Aurelia spoke to him privately. Do you see now, Ethan? The future is not one race above another. It is in learning from each other, in finding strength where no one expects it. Ethan nodded, his voice steady. Then I will stand by that future, as I stand by you. The queen looked at him with quiet pride. For the first time in many years, she felt less alone in carrying the weight of her empire. And so the story of a human guard and an alien queen became more than a hidden secret. It became a bond beyond worlds, one built not on power, but on trust, courage, and the simple truth that even the strongest sometimes need another to steady them.